Today I thought we'd do a bit of math hammer centered around Inceptors, so let's look at some damage outputs, durability and some other fun numbers. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're all about trying to get the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. Today I thought we'd have a look at some real numbers for what an actual squad of Inceptors can achieve on the tabletop. Have a look at both the Assault Bolters and the Plasma Exterminators, and compare their damage and durability. This isn't going to be a full tactical review of Inceptors, we have already done one of those, fairly recently as well, so I'll link that down in the description below. So without further ado, let's take a look at some numbers. So first of all, I thought I'd compare the relative damage output of the Assault Bolter Inceptors and the Plasma Exterminator Inceptors, and just for a little bit of context, I've also got their relative points cost in suppressors here as well, just to show what one competitor can do. In this little chart, they're not getting any bonus from combat doctrines, these are just the raw profiles of the guns as is. Basically this has very simple results. The Assault Bolters are better against all of the 1 wound infantry targets that we've chosen, and the Plasma Exterminators are better against all of the multi-wound targets. For the comparison, I have assumed that we're overcharging if we're targeting anything with 2 wounds or more. So that's against the Intercessors, Aggressors, Vehicle and Knight, because frankly if we're not overcharging the Plasma Inceptors, then they really don't compete all that well with the Assault Bolter ones. If we didn't bother overcharging them, then their efficiency would drop by half, and sometimes more because of the difference in strength. If we're not overcharging, then the only category that the Plasma Exterminators win would be against a standard Toughness 7 3-up save vehicle, which isn't bad, there are a lot of those targets around. But considering how expensive Plasma Exterminators are on a point for point basis, the Plasma ones are 59 points a model and the Assault Bolters are 41. It's never going to be worth it to take the Plasma Exterminators instead, because your equal investment in Assault Bolter Inceptors will be that much more durable point for point. This leads me to think that if you are bothering to take Plasma Exterminators, you do need to overcharge them to get the value out of them, otherwise you may as well just have taken the Assault Bolters. It is interesting to notice that the suppressors have the same or worse damage output than their equal investment in Plasma Exterminators in every single category, but obviously the suppressors have big advantages in other ways, in that they're really long range, more durable as a whole, and the very big advantage of not trying to kill themselves when they shoot. I'm not really meaning for this to be a side-by-side comparison between Inceptors and suppressors though, as the two serve very different roles in my opinion. Inceptors are better to drop down and deliver a really powerful payload, where the suppressors are probably better hanging back in your deployment zone and just using their jump pack manoeuvrability options if there aren't any efficient targets to shoot at when they're staying still. So this next little chart has the numbers for what happens if we put them in tactical doctrine, so their Assault Bolters and the Plasma Exterminators are getting an extra pip of AP each. Now this is going to affect the Assault Bolters a lot more, because going from AP1 to AP2 is quite a bit better than going from AP3 to AP4 due to the way modifiers work. This sees our Assault Bolter Inceptors pull quite a long way ahead on all of the infantry types, and are now decently ahead on those tactical marines. The Plasma Inceptors are still way better against the Intercessors, but they're really not so far apart when we're targeting Aggressors due to those damage 2 Plasma Exterminators not being anywhere near as effective against 3 wound models, just because damage 2 doesn't go into 3 wounds very well. This also sees us gain ground a bit against the Knight with the 5-up invul save, because obviously we don't care about any extra AP for the Plasma Exterminators, the Knight's already on its invul, where the Assault Bolters do get some good value out of it. Overall though, I think that these tables show that, at least in terms of damage output, Assault Bolters nicely win against any light infantry going around, and the Plasma Exterminators win whenever they're targeting anything tougher, particularly on things like Toughness 7 vehicles and 2 wound infantry with decent saves. Next I just thought that we'd have a look at what we can get if we really push these weapons to the max. Firstly, we've got the Assault Bolters being run as Imperial Fists while also in the tactical doctrine. I admit that the Imperial Fists might well not want to be in the tactical doctrine most of the time, but if you are building a list around Inceptors, for whatever reason you feel like, running them as Imperial Fists and being in the tactical doctrine is about as good as you're ever going to get them. Their extra hits on 6s is basically just a flat 25% increase in the damage output compared with the previous slide, so our 240 points squad of 6 Inceptors will take out 20 Guardsmen, or 13 tactical marines, or put 6 or 7 wounds on a knight or vehicle on average. For the Plasma Exterminators, I think the single strongest way to run them at the moment is as Dark Angels and use Weapons of the Dark Age. Now at the moment while I'm recording this, I'm still on the lookout for Ritual of the Damned to come out, so I'm afraid I don't know what other benefits the Dark Angels are going to get from that book, but I'm pretty certain that they will get combat doctrines, so this shows their Plasma Exterminators with combat doctrines and Weapons of the Dark Age. Obviously their damage output against intercessors and the weaker troops choices doesn't change, but it absolutely puts their damage output through the roof against the aggressors. A 4-man squad of these guys with Weapons of the Dark Age will handily chew through 7 of them in one turn. They'd also take out over 2 rhinos and stack over 10 wounds on an Imperial Knight, and bear in mind that all of this is without any sources of rerolls, no captains or lieutenants, so it will be quite an easy matter to increase this damage further. At their highest level, I think that the Assault Bolter Inceptors have some just general all-round firepower. It's not enormously strong against any one target compared with other similar units for its points cost, but there isn't really anything that they're weak against, and they'll quite happily put a bunch of wounds on a knight, or lots more wounds on some guardsmen. In terms of the Plasma Inceptors, this helps to highlight just how much damage they can do in a single turn. If we did get them some Chapter Master rerolls off, if they were dropping near Azrael or something, they'd be doing an average of 28 wounds to toughness 7 vehicles, a pretty crazy number, where you could probably get to the point where you're almost paying for the points that you've invested in that squad, just in one drop. And you could take this even further by buying the last 2 Inceptors in the squad, taking it to 6 men, and with that plus Azrael rolls, you actually really do have a very good chance of one-shotting a knight in one drop, not something to be underestimated at all. Seeing as we're talking about overcharging our Inceptors so much, I thought we'd have a quick look at their chance of blowing themselves up, which admittedly is absolutely abnormally high, seeing as these guys are spitting out anywhere between 2 and 6 overcharged plasma shots per turn. When I looked at the numbers, the chance of an individual Inceptor dying from overcharged plasma if you overcharge without a source of reroll ones is just catastrophically high. Obviously, if you are playing with overcharged Inceptors, make sure that you roll the dice for each Inceptor individually, as even if they manage to roll multiple ones, then that will just mean that that Inceptor is dead, and it means that you're not unnecessarily picking up more Inceptors than you should have been doing for rolling all of the overcharged dice at the same time. It might be a bit time consuming, but it is the right way to do it, and to be honest, if you just roll all of the overcharged dice at the same time, there's a good chance that you'll just have the entire squad wiped out, when that isn't necessarily what should have happened. Even if you do this, however, if you don't have a source of rerolls, then they have a slightly over a half chance of dying from each overcharged volley that they make, so you really do have to weigh up the risks and benefits of maximising their damage output. To be efficient though, as we've seen versus the Assault Bolters, they absolutely do have to overcharge, otherwise there's basically no point in taking them as Plasma Inceptors, so it's pretty much imperative that you have a source of reroll 1s next to those Inceptors at all times. When you do have reroll 1s, the chance still isn't 0 however. For each Inceptor that you roll, you'll have an 11% chance of losing that Inceptor from its own overheats by re-rolling a roll of 1 into another one. This means that you're typically likely to lose 1 Inceptor in about every 2 turns of firing with them, presuming you're using a full 6-man unit, which frankly is a lot more acceptable than losing half the squad in one volley. Interestingly, if you do have a Chapter Master nearby for the full rerolls, their chance of blowing themselves up with their own plasma goes up. This is because you're re-rolling both 1s and 2s, so you have 2 different numbers that you're re-rolling, and both of those could get you re-rolled into a 1. The maths works out that it's 20% likely that you'll lose each Inceptor firing with full re-rolls, so that's going to be around 1 dead Inceptor per turn out of a squad of 6. As they do have quite weak durability anyway though, I wouldn't worry too much about losing a bit more if you do have full re-rolls. They might well be going down next turn anyway, so it might still be worth it just to squeeze every little iota of damage output out of them before they do get shot down. Finally, I thought I'd compare them to a bunch of other options, durability wise, to see how many hits they can take before going down. Now the points of these units don't exactly work out, but they're all between 160 and 170 points of the same unit, so it gives a pretty decent comparison. We're assuming that we're using the Assault Bolter Inceptors here, as they're the slightly more durable version. The Plasma Inceptors will be approximately 2/3 the durability of these guys point for point, as the Assault Bolter Inceptors are just over 2/3 the cost of the Plasma Inceptors. It is worth noting that the Inceptors have the heaviest firepower out of any of the models on this list, so they aren't likely to be all that durable, as you'll be paying a lot of their points cost for those nice Assault Bolters. That being said, out of this list, they do have the worst defensive profile against Strength 3 lasguns, though it will still take 108 successful hits to bring them down, so it's not exactly like they're the most effective on them. I think that they're particularly susceptible to Strength 3 weapons, because Strength 3 still wounds Toughness 5 on 5 just the same as it does Toughness 4. The Intercessors and the Terminators are the strongest against lasfire, with the Tactical Marines and the Bikers coming at a middle ground. Against bolt rifle fire that's Strength 4 AP-1, the Inceptors are actually fairly durable, due to having that helpful Toughness 5. Surprisingly enough, it's the Bikes that win out in this bracket, with the Intercessors not so far behind, and the Terminators and the Tac Squads going down the easiest. Next up, against heavy bolter fire, the Inceptors do moderately well, due to their Toughness 5, but it just doesn't quite compete with the Intercessors and the Bikes again, and similarly with the AP-1, the Terminators and Tactical Marines are considerably less durable. And finally, we have the Damage 2 weapons, the Avenger Gatling Cannon, the Auto Cannon and the Overcharged Plasma, all of which make a real mess of the multi-wound targets, and the Tactical Marines come out on top durability-wise. The Inceptors have a bit of an advantage against their 2-wound counterparts here. It actually makes them tougher than the Bikes against Damage 2 weapons, just due to the fact that every 2 damage shot will off a Bike, but you'll still need 2 of them to kill an Inceptor. But the sturdy Intercessors are the toughest out of the 2-wound models. So overall, durability-wise, the Inceptors don't really shape up too badly compared to their counterparts. They're less durable than the Intercessors, but I think they're kind of expected to be, because the Intercessors are troops with lower damage output, and the Inceptors are more sort of damage dealers to throw themselves into the midfield, kill a bunch of enemy targets, and also be fairly durable. I think it's quite helpful that they outperform the Terminators durability-wise at least, as that's probably their closest equivalent in a deep striking damage dealing unit, and they outperform the Bikes against damage 2 weapons, though if we did look at higher strength anti-tank weapons, then the Bikes would do better than the Inceptors. Like I said, these are for the Assault Bolter Inceptors, and they just about hold their own to their counterparts. The Plasma Inceptors are really quite weak in comparison, if we're talking about a durability point of view, just because they cost so much more per wound of Inceptor that you put on the table. Finally, Inceptors are often able to charge after they deep strike. They have a 28% chance of making a charge on a 9-inch charge, and if they get a +1 from somewhere, such as being Blood Angels, then they'll have a 42% chance. We're going to be doing a bit more Math Hammer tomorrow about the odds of getting in on a charge from deep strike, so feel free to check back if you'd like to see that. I hope that some of the maths was a little bit helpful. This wasn't really supposed to be an in-depth tactical review or anything. I just thought I'd have a look at some of the numbers and stats for using Inceptors, and see how they shape up between the 2 different variants of them, and against the relative competition. Thanks for listening to another Auspex Tactics video. If you'd like to see any similar content to this, feel free to subscribe, and support me on Patreon if you're finding these videos entertaining. Thanks again for listening. I'll hope to see you guys next time.